Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Understanding New Cybersecurity Frameworks and Regulations. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
With that, I will turn it over to today's speaker to introduce himself and get us started. Christian?
Thanks, Laura. Yes, I do not offer legal or accounting or investment advice, and if I did, you probably shouldn't take it. I'm Christian Hansen. I'm a partner in our cybersecurity practice here at Moss Adams. I lead our cybersecurity consulting group within the cyber practice. I've been working in IT, governance, risk, and compliance, cybersecurity-related things for about 17 years. And happy to be with you today. I've spent about the last 8 years working specifically in federal government-related cybersecurity initiatives. So I have a thought or two about the content for today. Just overall agenda, the things we want to accomplish here. We'll take some time to talk through a lot of kind of big and or important breaches that have happened over the past year or so. Companies that have been breached, how did they get breached? What are the lessons we learned from those? Some more information about just summary of breach. What do the statistics tell us? We'll be reviewing a lot of content from Verizon's data breach investigation report. There's some interesting trends and changes in trends last year that we'll want to look at. We'll talk a little bit about regulations and then wrap things up at the end. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. So first polling question here, how many hours a day do you spend remote calls and meetings?
And just a reminder, the polling questions are located on the slides we are presenting. To respond, please click the button next to the answer you choose and make sure to hit the Submit button. Okay, we'll give everybody just a couple more seconds here. All right, here are the results.
1 to 2 hours. You are lucky. I lost count. I spent a lot of time on remote calls. I also work in cybersecurity from my basement, so there's some of the stereotypes ring very true. Um, so breaches, there's been a lot of them. Some of them very relevant to energy and utilities. Some of them less directly relevant, but still really interesting in the lessons that we can learn. I'm actually going to start backwards. We'll talk about Colonial last. I'm going to start down at the bottom right with T-Mobile and AT&T. Both T-Mobile and AT&T were breached last year. Maybe one of them was this year. I think AT&T was early this year. T-Mobile got breached for the 8th or 9th time since 2018. I think they had 13 million records compromised. AT&T's breached. I think they initially reported 73 million customer accounts had been breached. I think they revised that number down, if I remember right, to around 57 million. So a lot of data going out the door. Move it, and actually SolarWinds, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Move it and SolarWinds are really interesting. Both of them kind of similar ideas. So both of them are IT providers. Move it was a file transfer tool, right? So it's used to help move things around. And the target with Move It was not really Move It itself, but everybody that uses that piece of software. So that breach was big. The total estimated cost of the breach across all industries, from a number I read in January, is about $10 billion. Because it affected banks, it's affected a lot of really large organizations. So again, the target was not necessarily the software itself or the company behind the software, but it was the users of it. And that's how it's similar to SolarWinds. Some of you may have heard of that breach. I think that was a 2022 breach. Really interesting attack pattern there. The bad guys got into not like a SolarWinds corporate network, but a software development pipeline for one of those products. And pretty interesting how they kind of slowly worked through the process of the breach. They breached the system. They sat around for a month or so, and then they injected their own code into the software development pipeline. So they added their own thing, but it was non-malicious. Like there was nothing in there. It was just really a test. And then they watched. And then when SolarWinds pushed out the software update for the product, they saw that this their malicious code, their injected code went with it. So they knew that what they were putting in was not being monitored or caught. And so then a couple months later, they actually delivered their payload, which effectively opened a backdoor into anybody that was using that SolarWinds product. So SolarWinds provides a lot of IT tools and technologies. So then when everybody hit, click update to the latest version, they all got this backdoor that then left them wide open and exposed. This impacted a lot of the United States federal government, again, massive, organizations around the world. The thing that was sort of a sea change in cybersecurity was related to SolarWinds. So the SEC initially issued what's called a Wells notice, which is a notice that, of criminal investigation against the chief information security officer at SolarWinds. They had since then filed formal charges. Typically, SEC is only filing charges against CEOs and CFOs. So this was a big shift that a security officer was now put into that process. I think that's still ongoing. It's not final. So there's still a lot to happen there. But it was a big deal. And the breadth and depth of that attack, it's affected a lot of folks in many ways that we don't know about, because backdoors being open to nation state adversaries is something that we generally don't talk about too much. OpenAI, I put OpenAI on here because AI is the new kid on the block, and it's already been breached. It was really small. It was 1% of paying customers, and it wasn't actually any data that they'd put into ChatGPT or the results from ChatGPT. It was just account data. So I say just account data. There's still some interesting things there, but to me, the interesting thing was it's already a target. So we should be thoughtful about that. Caesars and MGM were really interesting because they're both casinos, casino groups. Both of them got hacked last year. Both of them had ransomware events from those hacks. They took different paths to resolving it. So Caesars actually paid the ransom. From what I heard, the initial ransom was about a $30 million request. They ended up paying 15. MGM did not pay the ransom, so they chose to recover on their own. They came out and said that they believe the total cost of the breach was about $100 million to the organization. So that's going to be lost revenue. The casino floor was, down because it's connected. I actually knew some people that were at the hotel at the time. They couldn't open their doors to their hotel rooms because those are connected. So there was a lot of impact there. So dollar for dollar, Caesars made a better choice, seemingly. Little unclear if that remains to be true over time. A lot of times when you pay the ransom, you also become a soft target, so you will get hit again. Microsoft. So earlier this year, there was information published that the email accounts, so Office 365 email accounts for, I think it was the ambassador to China and the Secretary of Commerce, their emails had been hacked and read right before they were going overseas to meet with their counterparts in China. The Chinese had read their emails ahead of time. So this is interesting because it's real espionage, and real espionage is actually a very small percentage of breaches that happen. But Microsoft's, the gorilla in the room, and Office 365 is where a lot of people go. So there were some issues there as well. United Healthcare and Ascension. So both healthcare related things. United Healthcare was a business unit. Change Healthcare, it was actually the one breached. Change Healthcare runs a billing system that is the backbone of a lot of medical billing in the United States. There was a stolen username and password on an unpatched Citrix remote access endpoint that did not have multi-factor authentication enabled, and that's all it took. United Healthcare did 99 point something billion dollars in revenue in the first quarter of this year. Their CEO told Congress that he believes the total cost of this breach is going to reach $1.6 billion. Speaking of soft targets, so you Change Healthcare, United Healthcare paid the ransom to get the systems unlocked. And then once that opened up, a month or so later, a different hacking group came out and said, oh, by the way, we have 4 terabytes of your data, and if you don't pay us $22 million, we're going to start leaking that data online. They didn't pay. The data started getting leaked. All of a sudden, it stopped getting leaked. Seems to indicate that they paid the ransom. So speaking of soft targets, United Healthcare had to pay twice because they knew they would. We'll talk more about ransomware and how the threat actors target and how they calculate their dollar payouts and some interesting things there. Ascension Health, so their hospital network, they got ransomwared. Also, ransomware was deployed initially by a user that opened an email that they shouldn't have opened and clicked on the thing they shouldn't have clicked on. Familiar story. It shut down, I think, 40 hospitals. They did not have access to their electronic medical record system for 2 or 3 months. So, imagine taking your business and getting rid of all electronic systems and going back to paper, which is, maybe 30 years ago in operational thought process, and now do that at a hospital where people's lives are at stake. So this was not a small issue. I read I think last week that they're back up online. They have their medical record system back up and they're functioning again, but it was not easy. I've actually spoken to some other companies and individuals who chose that same route to not pay. and they decided to just, tear everything down and rebuild the IT system. And there's still, echoes of stress and anxiety from that event that they don't want to go through it again. Going now to the top of our list, so the second icon in, so water districts. So in October, November, December, I don't remember exactly, I think it was November last year, the FBI came out and said that fewer than 10, so probably 9 municipal water districts had been breached. From what I remember, all of them were running end-of-life controller modules, so it's a PLC. So it's a piece of hardware that runs software that you use to control industrial systems. All of them were end of life, which means the vendor was no longer supporting the software. I think many, if not all of them, were using default username and passwords, so those had not been changed. I read a story about one of those water districts. They were somewhere around Philadelphia. I don't remember exactly where. And they couldn't turn on their pressurization pumps. So they served a more rural area. And from what I understood, there were some farther outlying, water customers, and they had to turn on these pressurization pumps at 3 in the morning or whatever. And so now they had to send a human in to turn the pumps on because they couldn't remotely turn them on anymore. Which in and of itself, it's annoying, but it doesn't change a lot of lives. What would be more interesting from a municipal water perspective is, what if I could unchlorinate all of your water? And now everybody in your water district has E. coli or salmonella. We're all very sick. Or what if I overchlorinated all of the water and now everybody's dead? That was really interesting. So why these municipal water districts? Well, it turns out that 3 years ago, I think it was 2021, there was a municipal water district outside of Tampa. This happened right around the time of the Super Bowl, which I think was in Tampa that year, if I remember correctly. And the water treatment facility, they had 15,000 individuals or households that they served. The amount of lye that they had treated the water with, the normal amount was 100 parts per million. They got hacked, and the threat actor goosed it up to 11,000 parts per million in the water. Now they caught it. It would have taken 2 or 3 days for the whole system to be, up to that level. So they caught it. There weren't really any impacts, but for a long time, and I only saw that news article a couple days ago or a few weeks ago. So I didn't know that this had happened, where someone had been breached, and the treatment chemical amount, the amounts of chemicals that were used to treat the water had actually been overclocked. It would have made some people very sick, potentially some deaths related to it. And top of our list is Colonial Pipeline. So this one may be more familiar, a little closer to home. So Colonial Pipeline, right? Pipeline operator. Their billing system got breached, ransomwared. And so Colonial made the decision to shut the whole thing down in effort to prevent the ransomware from spreading. There was, I think, a little uncertainty around what the next phases of the breach would be. So this ended up with, fuel not being delivered, gas shortages, lines, and all those sorts of things. Thankfully, they were able to recover from it, but it was not easy and very impactful. So, as we, and Colonial Pipeline was, again, password spraying / stolen passwords. So if you don't know what password spraying is, you can go on the dark web and buy databases of usernames and passwords that have been stolen, right? So you might see, your Yahoo email account Yahoo got hacked. Don't worry, they only got usernames and passwords. What they end up doing is combining all of those breaches into a database and then selling that database. And so then I can go and say, here's a user. I want to go breach Colonial Pipeline in this instance. I'm going to go find all the usernames and passwords associated with that user and just try them all. I'm just going to spray them across and see which ones stick. And maybe we'll try to iterate on some of them. So if you use, a password that ends in the number 1, maybe we increment and try 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. See if you're just incrementing your passwords that way. So that was the cause of Colonial Pipeline. There's some more data in here around the specific breaches. We've talked about this already, but it's here if anybody wants additional details. So yeah, a lot of breaches and a lot of big breaches have happened, and a lot of very expensive breaches. So Laura, we're on to polling question number 2 here.
All right. Has your company completed a cybersecurity assessment in the last year? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. As a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. We'll give people just a few more seconds here. All right, and we'll move to the results.
Most of you, yes. That's fantastic. So now that we've talked about some specific ones, let's talk about kind of macro level trends. So this comes out of Verizon's data breach investigations report. They publish it each year. This is from the 2024 published report, so this covers 2023. So first, a lot of breaches, 39% of them involve stolen user credentials. 18 or so percentage involve phishing. Phishing is used to steal credentials. So these are not like singular instance things. Interesting that phishing is a lot lower than stolen credentials, which means we are getting them through other means. Which breach was it? United Healthcare or MGM? One of the major, I can't remember which one it was specifically. One of those breaches that we talked about, I think it was MGM. Someone called, like got the number for the internal IT help desk, if I remember right, and they've pretended to just be the person. Oh, hey, I'm calling in because I got locked out. Can you reset my username and password? Send me the email. They were able to break in. So it was a simple phone call. So, protocols around help desk become pretty important. The one that's really interesting here is that exploiting a vulnerability. So this is technical vulnerabilities. So unpatched systems and things like that. There's actually 180% increase in the use of exploiting technical vulnerabilities from 2022 to 2023. So a major uptick in the use of technical vulnerabilities to perpetrate breaches. Could be the result of Move It, quite frankly, because that was kind of an IT tool that got breached, and we used the technical exploits there to break in. So it'll be interesting to see what the data from 2024 shows, if this stays true or if it reverts back to sort of the historical mean. 68% of breaches involve a human. Humans are a weak point. Humans like to do things like be nice and accommodating, generally speaking. I'm not suggesting that we not be nice and accommodating, but also hackers will do things like if you are tall and or good looking, you can generally get what you want when you ask for it. So threat actors will leverage expected human behavior. I can tell you a story about a physical penetration test that we were contracted to do a number of years ago. The client had some very specific concerns about doors. So the building layout, you walk in the front door, they had contracted with the city police. They had a literal police officer at the front door, at the front desk, armed, uniform, cars out front. But you walk in, it's this big, beautiful atrium, and then there's this hallway. The desk is a little bit in front of you. There's a hallway down to your left, and there's an exterior door down the left. They were worried about this door and some other exterior doors from what I remember. Well, it turns out that there's a burger joint across the street where people would go to eat. People tend to walk around with our badges, right? On our belts. Probably can't see that because of the background thing, right? We have our badges on our belts. You can go and buy badge readers and cloners. So we went and stood pretty close to somebody, cloned their badge with the badge reader in a backpack, took a little picture with our cell phones of what the picture looked like on the badge, printed our own picture, put our face and name on it, and walked right in the front door. We could dress like they dressed because we knew how they dressed because we could watch them. And we sent, I think, 3 or 4, 2 or 3, I don't remember the number of people in. A couple of them got caught. And how did they get caught? Well, someone was going up the elevator and people were just talking. Hey, I haven't met you before. Who are you? Oh, I'm so-and-so. Oh, are you new? I haven't seen you before. Yeah, I'm new. Who do you work for? I work in IT. I work in IT. What do you. So they were just being kind but inquisitive, and ended up being able to root out like, oh, you are not supposed to be here, in which case we pulled out our get out of jail free card. So fun, yes. Involved a human element a lot. So a lot of breaches involve humans. 32% of breaches, and this is actually a bit of an uptick. We'll see a graph on this. 32% of breaches involve some sort of ransomware extortion. 28% of breaches were just the result of some sort of error. 15% of breaches involved a third party. So in some ways, I would expected that to be more, but it's not. Oftentimes, it's our own humans that are the source of the problem. So the organized crime used to be bigger. End user has crept up. If we see here on who are the people, organized crime and end users make up the vast majority of the bad people. The threat actors, state sponsored, is actually very small. We hear about those a lot because they make the news, right? It's a little bit boring when it's just like a regular person. We want to hear that, the bad guys came and we conquered the bad guys, but it's a very small percentage that are state sponsored or, nation state affiliated. The one thing I would say is I think that energy, this whole sector, utilities in general, is probably a bigger target. If we look at what Russia has done in the Ukraine, hacking the infrastructure, shutting down power, shutting down water has become a key part of their campaign there. So your industry specifically may be the target of that more than others. The vast majority of cybercrime is financially motivated. These are people that have a job. You can see a very small percent are espionage. So realize that a lot of organized crime and end users are out there looking for a buck. Most of the espionage is going to be state-sponsored sorts of things. Some of those are also just looking for a buck or to shut you down too. So you can see the trends over time. Is it an internal user? It's been up, it's been down. External users, it's been up, it's been down. Partner organizations, so those are going to be like your outsourced IT provider if you have one. Very, very, very little amount of cybercrime is committed by them. So a little bit of the same information, vulnerability, exploit, credentials, and phishing. But here at the bottom, we've got this graph of ransomware and extortion. So you can see that over time, ransomware has been pretty consistent for the past few years as a percentage of breaches, but extortion continues to go up. So it's a slightly different, think of extortion as a slightly different version of ransomware. Ransomware, I'm encrypting your systems or locking you out. Extortion may be, I just have your data and I'm going to leak your data unless you pay me, right? So it's not really ransomware because I haven't really deployed malicious payload into your environment. I just took your data. So when you combine those two things and you think about them as you have my stuff and you're making me pay you to not release or to let me out, you can see that there is actually a pretty significant uptick in that line overall. I expect that trend. Oops, polling question. I don't do that yet. I forgot. Couple things on ransomware. So one, the data is pretty consistent over the years. The ransom amounts are on average 1.34% of your revenue. So bad guys know how much money you make. Bad guys are trying to find the dollar amount that you will pay, right? Because again, if we go back a slide, what's their motivation? Money. So what are they looking to do? I'm trying to maximize how much you will pay me. If I go too high, you're not going to pay me and you're going to recover your own systems. If I go too low, I'm not maximizing my profit, my return on my hacking investment. So it's typically 1.34%. That's been the average for a while. The most interesting thing about the ransomware payout amounts is the average payout amount is going down. So if they continuously target 1.34% of our revenue, and if the ransom amounts are going down, what the data tells us is smaller and smaller organizations are getting breached. And so it's not just the United Healthcare and the Change Healthcares that are at risk. It's really everybody. We hear about those because there are reporting requirements and things go to Congress and all those sorts of things. And everyone's asking about the polling questions. Yes, I accidentally clicked too far. So no matter how big or how small you are, you could be monetized. And that's, again, like, what are we after? We're after money. Who's after the money? Mostly organized crime, sometimes internal users, a disgruntled employee or whatnot. Your vendors, like if we go back to this again, that's this partner, like your outsourced IT provider is an example. Very small percentage of breaches happen from them. Most of it is external, some of it is internal, and increasing on the internal side. Again, it'll be interesting to see if those numbers hold over time or how they correct. So the key thing on ransomware is a couple of other thoughts. One, ransomware is just the payload. You've already been hacked, and you've probably had the average amount of time for the bad guys to be inside your network is about 3 months. So you've been hacked for a while before you get ransomwared. Now, we should still have processes and controls and response and recovery and all of those sorts of things for the ransomware event, right? We should still do stuff about that. But there's a lot of upstream things that we can do to prevent the situation from occurring in the first place. So ransomware is kind of an interesting thing, right? It's 15 years ago, 13 years ago, 2011, Target retailer, they got hacked. My credit card got stolen. The bad guys got in through the HVAC system, and I don't mean Tom Cruise crawling on all fours through the ductwork. I was actually talking to some construction folks a couple months ago, and I gave that example, and there was an HVAC vendor there. I was like, can they actually do that? I don't think it would hold their weight. And he said, no, it actually would. I was a little annoyed because I was like, I thought it was Hollywood being ridiculous, but they could actually do that. No, they hacked through the remote HVAC system. So, you could log in from online and change the temperature in the store and do whatever. That system got hacked. They were able to jump from that network to wherever that got them to the payment card network, point of sale systems. And then they could just take every swipe. And so ransomware means we don't have to steal credit cards anymore. Ransomware means I can hack anybody and make them pay me money. The dark web value of a stolen credit card is like $1 each. The dark web value of a stolen healthcare record, I always forget. I think it's like $30 or maybe $60 a record. Why? Well, banks are pretty good at preventing credit card fraud. Retail stores are pretty good at preventing credit card fraud. Now, the numbers of the volume of credit card fraud at a retail level is actually really small now. It's pretty easy to steal an identity if I have your entire medical history. Why would I want to steal your identity? Well, what if I could get a prescription for fentanyl in your name? And then I can go sell that. And that's worth a lot of money on the street. Stolen identities have a lot of value. And the dark web and the black market for information shows us that. So ransomware is a monetization event. That's how we make money from the hack. You've already been hacked. You've been hacked for probably at least 3 months. And the size of organizations that are paying ransoms continue to get smaller. So everybody's a target. Now we will move on to the polling question. Sorry for the head fake there.
All right. Do you have someone that has security in their job title? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. Also, you do have the option to submit questions for the presenters in the Q&A window. If we don't have time to respond during the webcast, we will do our best to follow up with you afterwards. Okay, we can leave it up for a couple more seconds, make sure everybody gets this third polling question. All right, and here are the results.
Oh, fantastic. A lot of you have someone with a security title. That's great. So hopefully now that you're sufficiently scared that you'll get hacked and terrible things will happen, what do you do about it? Talked about ransomware a lot, and that gets a lot of attention. If we view, like, what are executives worried about in cybersecurity? Ransomware. Okay, that's valid. But how about how you got hacked in the first place? A lot of other bad things happened before ransomware was there. So a few things. One, train your people. Don't click the email. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Don't do drugs. I remember that commercial. Like, this is the email. Don't click the email. It is amazingly simple. It is, as we've all seen with our spam filters and junk mail things, like, it is amazingly cheap to send out 1 million emails, and you only need one of them to land. So your success rate will be very low, but they don't need their success rate to be very high. So we saw with Ascension Health, it was an email click that delivered malware to a workstation that then perpetrated through the network, gave the bad guys a backdoor. There's a very familiar pattern here. Click the email, malware, get credentials, elevate permissions, lurk, deploy. It's a pretty normal process. So train your people, train your people, train your people. Always constantly be training the people. Another thing, tighten your access control. So who has access to what? Limit it. In a lot of ways in the accounting world, we've been good at this for a while, right? Like, I am not going to let my accounts receivable and accounts payable person be the same person for good reasons. If I can set up a vendor and pay a vendor, I could set up myself as a vendor and pay myself, and no one would ever know. So we're pretty good at, putting controls around who can do what in those systems, but we should apply those principles broadly throughout the organization. Another idea, don't reuse your passwords, pretty please. It's bad. Passwords get stolen, they get reused. A lot of people will come up with familiar password patterns that they use, and we can figure those out and then break in. Like we saw earlier, a lot of breaches involved user credentials. So we steal them or guess them and turn on multi-factor authentication. It's a little annoying. It works really well. Like if you use corporate Gmail, you can go into your Google suite and turn on multi-factor authentication. Yeah, you're going to have to pull up your phone and get a 6-digit code and type it in. That would have saved United Healthcare $1.6 billion. They probably just missed the endpoint. They forgot they had it. It was a low priority. They thought it was a low priority thing, right? But enabling multi-factor authentication can save you a lot of blushes in the long run, and use it well. Some of you may have seen there's been revised guidance around password reset, right? We do this thing where every 90 days we have to reset our passwords, and it's annoying. The individual that wrote that guidance wrote it for NIST, so the National Institute of Standard and Technology. And back in the day, that was the guidance, right? Rotated every 90 days, 8-character password, all those things that we all know and love. Came out and said, don't do that anymore because it forces people to use relatively insecure and guessable and rotating passwords. However, if you are not going to rotate them, there are a number of other things that you must do. one of which is check your passwords against the data bank of known breached passwords, which most people don't do. We're really good at saying, great, I'm not going to rotate my passwords anymore. We're really bad at saying, and I'm going to add these other steps that didn't exist before. Those are all in NIST 863. 800-63 is the publication where that standard is written. It can explain what to do there. But tighten up access control. Tight access control can prevent a lot of these issues. Third, patch your systems, internal systems, external systems, patch them all the time. The use of technical exploits, again, there was a 180% increase in the use of that in breaches from 2022 to 2023. You don't see that trend reversing itself. Hackers have actually specifically targeted MITRE. So MITRE organization, they define a lot of vulnerability scoring things. So they were taken out, and then NIST's NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, I can't remember, I just know it's the NVD. That's way behind. So like there's public resources of things there that are supposed to help guide this. Those have been lagging. So I only see that as a threat vector that's going to increase. And another thing to do, just monitor what the heck's going on. Once you have ransomware deployed, they've been in your systems for 3 months. So you've had 3 months to catch them. So you've got to have a SIM, a security information event monitor, basically a tool that's going to aggregate all of your system security logs into one place. You can build alerts and trends, all those sorts of things. If you don't have a team, can't afford to stand up a team that just sits and stares at the screen and watches the logs, you can do that as a service. It gives you the opportunity to catch the bad guys in the act or before the act, quite frankly. So train your people, tighten your access control, patch your systems, watch what's going on. Lastly, and this isn't a real bullet point, but kind of a thought, vendors continue to be a growing source of breaches. I remember in Q4 of last year, kind of in the echo of Caesars and MGM hacks, that I think it was the FBI came out and said that the casino games on the floor, right? So slot machines or whatever other electronic button pushing machines were a threat vector. I don't know if that was the entry point for Caesars or not. I don't remember how they got in, but it was interesting that in the kind of shadow of those breaches, they came out and said, oh, by the way, think about this. So vendors continue to be a source of breaches, but also you might be somebody's vendor. So, what does that really mean? I don't really know. A lot of regulation has been changing in response to this. And so this is probably the area where I, as an individual human, know the least about FERC or EPA cybersecurity rules or TSA's rules for LNG facilities, pipeline protection. So the thing to think about with the federal government is it's one big thing, but they're all also a whole bunch of little individual things. So the Department of Energy and the EPA, they're different people doing different things. They have different opinions. They're going to create different rules from the TSA. The reality is if we put up a giant Venn diagram, 80% of it overlaps. MFA is good no matter who you are and what you do. Training your people is good no matter who you are and what you do. Tightening your access control, monitoring there's some core foundational security principles that transcend all of these things. I don't know if we're going to end up with a singular, here is the cybersecurity standard for everyone, period, or if we'll continue with this very fractured environment. My gut says that over time we get to a more centralized, singular view of things, but I don't know, right? I don't make all the rules, thankfully, other than in my own household. So I don't know what it will look like, but I do know that generally speaking across the board, there's good cyber hygiene that everyone should do, and it doesn't matter who's telling you to do it, they're going to tell you to do the same things. For you, for you individually as organizations, obviously you have some regulatory risk, right? Like if I don't get it right for my industry, there could be some things there. If I don't report it correctly, that's usually where things start differentiating a little bit. But those are the things to think about. So know your regulations for your industry, keep track of it. If you can't keep track of it yourself, find someone that can. But also know, like, if you're in a spot where you're a multi-regulatory place, there's probably a lot of overlap. Last polling question. Let's do this, and then we can hit some Q&A things the last few minutes we have.
Okay, great. Yes, the last polling question is, after today's presentation, do you plan to make any changes to your cybersecurity protocols? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. For those of you that would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them now from the console. We will also be sending them out via email tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast. Okay, we'll give people just a few more seconds to answer here. All right, and let's switch to the results.
Fantastic, yeah. Maybe some changes, maybe not. And maybe, we don't know, because you got to see where you're at. So we have a lot of Q&A questions. We've got a few minutes, so I can start tackling those. I'm just going to start at question 1 because that's how my brain works. Doesn't paying a ransom open you up to the potential for federal charges like terrorism funding? That don't know. Probably not. Maybe. Probably not. It's tricky. It's tricky because who did it actually go to? And did you know you were doing who you were like, that's a multi-layered question that doesn't have a very clear or easy answer. I think generally the answer is no, potentially yes, but I would guess generally not. I'm not currently aware of a regulation that says you can't do it. You can't pay the ransom. So it's a good question. I don't know that the answer is entirely clear on it. My gut sense is no. What's the probability of perpetrators getting caught? Are you asking because you're a perpetrator? That's a cybersecurity person thought. Pretty dang low, to be honest. So it turns out people that are good at hacking stuff are also good at hiding who they are. And so finding specific individuals is not easy. Finding specific individuals where the long arm of United States justice can reach them is really hard. There have been some instances where law enforcement agencies have outed and specifically named the people that they're after. There's a lot more of them than get named. I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, I'm guessing more of them are known than we know about. I'm also guessing that the vast majority of them are unknown. So, you know, I've seen instances where they've taken down botnets and they've taken down, you know, they take down these things, but I can't think of a good analogy. You know, you're taking out one out of a million. So it's a constant threat. It's a constant risk and a problem for law enforcement to catch and do something about it. So the better thing is for us as individual organizations to protect ourselves. That's just really, really hard. Does the data capture internal threats? Yeah, I think we talked about that. Is a disgruntled employee, vendor, contractor. So employees would be an end user, whereas that partner thing would catch like your vendors or your contractors that are, if they're perpetrating the breach. Vendors can be a source of risk, like MoveIt and SolarWinds were. I read another story. There was a telecommunications company in the Midwest. I think they were in Oklahoma, but I don't remember exactly. And you know, we all have our router modem device that does a lot of things that come from our internet service provider at home. Those got a bad firmware update that had malware in it, and it took 600,000 people offline. Now, you know, the internet was down for 2 days. Parents rejoiced. We made the kids go outside and drink from the garden hose instead of sit on their screens all day. but we took 600,000 people offline just with a bad software update, malicious software update. So I would think of vendors less about, are the vendors going to hack me? Probably not. But will the vendor maybe give me bad software updates or something like that could impact us? Possible. That's a growing risk, and they don't do it knowingly, but it is a risk. So this is why if you look at new regulations, if you look at how the security frameworks have been updated, they've been pushing in supply chain risk management. And so that's really the sort of threat scenario that supply chain risk management is supposed to address. What are our options if we don't pay? If you don't pay a ransom, well, it depends on what they've done to you. So one, they could just lock you out of a system, in which case, like, unplug it all, wipe it, and start over, which is effectively like what Ascension Health had to do, the Ascension hospitals. They had to take the system down and rebuild the system from the ground up. It's immensely painful. It's supposed to be immensely painful, and the ransom's supposed to be just enough that you're willing to pay it to not go through the work. If they have encrypted your data, not taking necessarily the application of the system down, but let's say they encrypt your data, different answer. So do I have backups? How frequent are my backups? Are my backups unencrypted or Adogas? Those get owned as well. And then how recent are my backups? So we have this concept when we do business impact analyses. One of the data points we calculate is a recovery point objective, which is basically how old can my data be before, if my system were to go down, how old can my data be before it's way too old, right? So if you are Bank of America and you're transacting in the thousands of transactions, I don't know, a minute, I'm making that up. You're processing millions of dollars every minute. You probably need very recent transaction history. Other organizations, your data could maybe be a week old and it won't matter. So not paying the ransom depends on what they're doing to you, will dictate how you can try to respond. You can build effective response programs to that. The question is, what's the cost of the response versus the cost of the ransom? The risk with paying, again, is now you're a soft target like United Healthcare. We got into your systems and locked you out. Pay us. Okay, we paid you, we unlocked it. Coincidentally, someone else now pops up with 4 terabytes of your data. I wonder where they got it from. And says, okay, now we have all this data, pay us or we release it. They paid, they didn't release it. They probably are still reselling that data. So they're making hundreds of millions on that breach. So yeah, how do you respond to a ransomware event? It depends on what they're doing to you. It will dictate your response. Last couple slides here. I know we're bumping up to time here. So what do you do for cyber? The first question I always ask is, who's in charge? Who's on first? This governance idea. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, the CSF, it moved to version 2.0 in February this year. The CSF is a great framework. It's not the only one, it's a good one. They added governance. If you look at what the SEC rolled out with their incident disclosure rules and their cyber risk management program disclosure rules, there's kind of this movement towards more governance. And what I've seen a lot of over the years is cybersecurity is the responsibility of the IT guy. And the IT guy person does the best they can with what they know, but they're juggling. I got to keep the lights on. I got to make work easy to happen. Oh, and keep it secure. And usually you can have 2 of those pretty reliably. So who's in charge of this program? Realistically, it should be your board. They should be the ones that are giving us direction, giving us investment. Do you have a cybersecurity budget? Are we reporting on cybersecurity? Who are we reporting it to? How often are we reporting it to them? Because you really need that level of engagement from that level within the organization. Then you need to build a program. So a lot of times we have elements of program that exist, right? Because we've been reactive to things that have happened. So we kind of put the cart before the horse a little bit, where we have program elements, but we haven't necessarily always had governance. Get the governance in place, build a program, start with risk. What are the risks that you face? What are the controls you have in place? What's your leftover risk, or we would call it residual risk? And then what are you going to do about it? Honestly, if you have computers and people, you face most of the same security risks that everybody else does. But there'll be some industry-specific things and corporate-specific things. So build the governance piece, have a program that operates, and then get an assessment done. So this becomes the feedback loop, right? Think of this as just like your financial statement audit or similar, whatever is relevant to your org. But you do financial statement audits because you want to know, are we like keeping track of the dollars appropriately? The cybersecurity assessment just starts telling us, how are we doing on our cybersecurity execution? And also sometimes assessment things can help with insurance. So one, getting a policy, two, the cost of that policy, or three, the effectiveness of how much they pay out against that policy. I've seen and heard of, I was talking to an insurance guy, so that they denied issuing a policy for someone because they just didn't basically have a program in place. I've heard of other instances where cyber insurance didn't pay because they didn't have program elements in place. It's kind of like expecting your car insurance to pay after you took the brakes off your car and then drove around and crashed into somebody. And then claims adjuster is going to show up and go, wait a minute, you took the brakes off your car. That's your fault. I'm not paying. Same idea, right? You need to have a program. You need to operate that program. That's basically it. I know we're almost at time. I'll try to jump through a couple other questions here. Are there consultants a company can hire to help with recovering data? Yes, there are forensic organizations out there that you can hire. Mandiant is like the big name. I think Verizon, maybe Google. I think Google owns them now. But a lot of times what will happen if you have an event, a lot of times your cyber insurance folks will send their own forensics investigators because they want to know what happened. So you may not need to go hire somebody for that. You may get some of that through your insurance policy. So I would look at that. Data recovery becomes really hard because if ransomware is, bad guys are good at what they do. They're going to lock it out with encryption that we can't break right now, unless you have access to a quantum computer that can break all encryption that is existing right now. But that's really theory. So can you help with recovering data? You can try. It depends on how they encrypted it. My gut says you're not going to get it back because AES 256 is not really easily breakable, which is great until it's used against you. So let's see if I can get through one more question. Are password generators reliable? Generally, they generate in a way that makes it impossible to remember, so you end up writing them down. So this is Christian's personal opinion. I really like password managers. So Keeper, Bitwarden. I used to use LastPass personally. I stopped using it because they got hacked like 3 times, and that just started making me nervous. So I moved. The idea with a password manager is you remember one master password to that place, and then it randomly will create passwords for you and store them just like in a database. Yes, excuse me. Yes, it creates a single point of failure. So if that gets hacked, all your things are in trouble. Most of those password managers will store a one-way encrypted version of your password. So if you say your password is password, when you type it in, it'll run it through an encryption algorithm. So password isn't the actual thing that's saved. It's the encrypted version of that. So then if the bad guys were to breach that, they'd only get the encrypted version of your password. Then they'd have to know the encryption method that was used to encrypt your password. And then if you set up the password manager correctly, the one-way hash of your password, like the algorithm it uses, is unique. And there's ways you can manage it that make it pretty good, at least today. So I personally use one. Deploying them across an organization can be costly and tricky. It creates new habits. But I do think that there are things there. there's also a move away from there are some technologies that are pushing us away from passwords entirely. I think those are still fairly in their infancy. So if I were like basic rudimentary stuff today, turn on multi-factor authentication. That gives you a lot. Don't reuse your same passwords. That gets you a lot. We are at time. Thank you all for your time. I know there was a lot more. There were quite a few more questions. We can follow up. I will just throw this out there. If you need to spitball with somebody, you just want to talk to somebody about cyber, you're more than welcome to hit me up. I'm happy to open my calendar and make myself available if you need some time. So thank you for your time. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Christian, for a great presentation today. And like you said, if we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Feel free to reach out to any of our presenters if you have any additional questions. We invite you to visit our website for more resources and information on this topic, many of which are linked in your handouts window. If you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks. And finally, here is a link to a survey for today's presentation. Your feedback is always appreciated. Again, thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.